someone sent a script to my agent who sent it on to me and said, read this, here's where they shoot, when they shoot, are you available, and do you like the part? And I found the character to be so wonderfully multi-layered and complex. A woman my age who's obsessively hanging on to her son and can't let go to the point where it becomes very destructive for him and for her and for everyone involved, and who can't banish the past from her mind. And so it looked like a delicious challenge. I knew the work of the director, or at least I knew his producing work, and he had a fabulous reputation as a producer. And I got to go to Winnipeg, which is one of my favorite quirky towns in Canada because it's got a wonderful theater scene and it's filled with delicious eccentrics, and it was sort of irresistible all around.
I'm just curious about connections or empathy that maybe you were able to bring to this character.
Well, I don't think you should be playing a character if you don't have any empathy for them. I mean, we should all be having empathy for all of our fellow men and women. There are very few people that are either pure evil or pure good. We're usually, all of us, a mixture of various shades of gray on the white to black scale, if you know what I mean. And so was she. And so she'd had some tragedies in her past that brought her to that she'd not been able to deal with or banish from her psyche, that brought her to the point where she is when we first see her in the movie, which is basically clinging on to this son and hating his girlfriend. And I think it's a not uncommon scenario. I didn't have a son, and one's relationship with one's daughter is always really different. So that her dilemma was not something that I'd ever experienced, but, you know, that's the fun of acting.
Right. Well, and you mentioned John Daly, who directed this. And, you know, so he's directing, but obviously everyone knows from his producing credits. And did you know personally? Did you know John Daly before this? And
you know, it turned out we compared notes, and we'd met in the 70s in England when everything was pretty wild, and there are a lot of the memories of the 70s that a lot of us can't bring back. But we'd met at a couple of parties and bumped into each other here and there, but it was all kind of vague, and I, of course, knew who he was, and he knew who I was, and it's a pretty small world, you know, or it was smaller than it used to be. And so, but I didn't know what he'd be like as a director, and I adored him as a director. He was very hands-off in a certain way, but if you weren't doing what he wanted, he let you know. And he had that delicious, dry British wit that just kept me, at any rate, in stitches all the time. I think young Noah had a different experience of it because he was a very American young man and hadn't traveled extensively and hadn't spent a lot of time in England, and I think often didn't get when John was being dry and British and thought he was being put down. But he got it towards the end.
And you said, he would tell you what he wanted when that would come up, but
yeah.
A lot of times he was, kind of a hands-off director.
Well, we would have rehearsals with ourselves, the actors, the night before, and figure out where we're going. And I hired a wonderful acting coach up there who was very helpful to Noah and me and Adriana and all the actors. And so when you presented what you thought was going on to him, if it fit into his vision, he went with it without much fuss and ado. If it didn't, he let you know very specifically why it didn't.
Well, and I'm curious, and I don't know if people have pointed this out to you or if you've thought about this or are aware of this, but from time to time you really get kind of tied up or associated with projects that would fall into kind of the horror suspense genre.
I certainly have. I was a scream queen when I was young before Superman, and then now I seem to be doing a ton of these again. So it's sort of fun.
This all goes back, obviously this all goes back to Sisters, but, I came of age, in the 80s. I remember a great episode you did of the HBO series, The Hitchhiker.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that was fun. Do you know who directed that? Philip Noyce, who's gone on to become a really top-notch director.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was the director. He was great.
Well, I'm curious, personally for you, what are your connection to kind of this horror genre that always comes back to you?
Honestly, it's simply what gets offered to me. It's not my favorite genre by any stretch of the imagination. So I like them when they have a sense of humor to them, and if they don't have a sense of humor, I try and stick one in. Right. A little wicked look here, a little wink the audience there. I think horror movie audiences are a lot more savvy than a lot of producers think. Well, and they know they're going to get a few laughs with their terror roller coaster.
Well, I'll ask you one last question because I know you're on a schedule.
Okay.
Here, I'll ask, and it is going back to I guess kind of where you started for a lot of us, which was in De Palma's sisters. We here at Geeks, we've done like 6-7 shows tribute to both De Palma and his films in particular.
Have you really? That's wonderful. He was my boyfriend for starters. And I was head over heels in love with him. And Jennifer Salt, who played Grace Collier, was and remains best friend. She was my best friend. So, and Amy Robinson, who went on to become a very successful producer, Ed Pressman, who produced it, I think it was his second attempt, went on to become very professional. We were all just kids playing Let's Make a Movie and having the time of our lives, and yet being very serious about filmmaking. So it was magic. And nowadays, when these young directors, independent directors, ask me to come and be on have a little part in their movies, I tell you, I get a feel for that. And you don't get that feel on those huge budget movies where the budget's the size of small countries, which is something of an obscenity, if you ask me. You get it on these young, independent film shoots. And these kids in their 20s who have bucked all the odds and scraped enough money together to make something are absolutely my favorite people to work with, bar none. There's an enthusiasm, an idealism, we're going to get this done despite the odds kind of spirit that is so evocative of my youth. So they're my favorite people to work with.